Mhm. Hey everybody, happy Thursday. We're just gonna give it a few minutes here while everybody joins. We got, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 minutes before we kick it off. So just pre-call chit chat. But if you gotta go get a cup of coffee or anything, um, feel free. You know what I saw the other day that I used to live on, like in college? Hot Pockets. You remember Hot Pockets?
Oh man, yes, I remember Hot Pockets because I dream about Hot Pockets because
Oh
they're
my
delicious.
God.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Oh,
haven't got my daughter on Hot Pockets yet, but she was talking a big game about pizza rolls recently.
oh,
Yeah.
Tostino's pizza rolls. Let's
Yeah. So
go.
I feel like that's my entryway.
I
I think that
mean, so we did we'd always just baked them or microwaved them, right? But had a buddy, we had like a guy's night. This is, whatever, 20 years ago. And we basically had basically a game night and a fry night. So you bring stuff that you like fried, and I'd never had deep fried pizza rolls.
oh man.
Game changer.
Yeah.
Game changer.
It's pretty amazing what you can get away
Yeah.
with a deep fryer. Yeah. That'll
But
yeah,
I love the
enjoy like
marketing too. Like hey everybody, just a few minutes before we're just pre-call chit chat as more people join. We just pre-call chit chat here. But um, when they launched Lean Pockets and they made you feel like you were actually eating something healthy, it's like
yeah,
what we did is we processed it so much more. We took out more fat and
yeah,
just processed
right.
it.
And you got so many other chemicals in there for you now. But yeah, but it's great. Yeah, those are good times. You got to get it in. I love the idea of deep frying a lean pocket
Oh yeah,
and just counteract.
everything.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
man,
good.
the Fry
It's pretty
Daddies
fun.
back in the day.
What are you gonna like? What fried delectable treat are you gonna expose to your children next?
Um, we've done a lot. When you wrap an Oreo in a crescent roll,
Mm,
that's delicious.
that's a move. That's a move. Oreos go well on a lot of things. We tried substituting, instead of doing a graham cracker for a s'more, using oatmeal cream pies,
Mm.
which is delicious, but you got to move fast because when you split that cream pie, it loses a lot of its
Yeah.
stability.
Yeah, yeah.
So you got to be ready to go with that
Oh,
thing.
that's interesting. We'll have
Yeah.
to try that.
Yeah.
We've substituted the Hershey bar for a Reese's peanut butter cup.
Oh yeah. So good.
And then you see these random things where like, why didn't I think of that? Where, you know, one of the kids took just two Hershey, just skipped the graham cracker and just took the Hershey bar with toasted marshmallow, and then the other one grabbed two peanut butter cups and cooked some marshmallow over the fire. Oh, it must be lunchtime. Hey, it's time to kick it off, too. Thanks, children.
What are you hungry, Julian?
All
This is
right.
great.
Well, I think it's an awesome time to kick it off. Happy what is it? Thursday, everybody. My name's Aaron. I'm the co-founder, managing director here at BWG Connect. We're a giant networking knowledge sharing group. And a few weeks here, we'll be 8 years old, and it's totally crazy. Kick this off just out of the need when I was on the brand side to connect with more brands as a whole. So I spend now the majority of my time talking with brands. I'd love to have a conversation with anybody on the line today, just network, knowledge share. It's from those conversations that a few things happen. One is we get the ideas and the topics for these webinars that we do, the dinners that we do, the full day events that we do. So I'd love to pick your brain on what would you like to see and what would you like to have us cover. The other thing is we're asking everybody, hey, who's really working for you and who's not? And from that, we've got a short list across the digital landscape. That's everything from, in this case, brand protection to Amazon agencies to SEO, LLMs, whatever it might be, email marketing. There's a lot of new tech and a lot of new partners popping up. So we try to stay on the forefront of that. More than happy to make any recommendations. But it's from all those connections that we also get the resident experts that we'll bring on here. And so Zach's been a longtime friend, partner, supporter of the network. Before we jump into this, a couple of housekeeping items. We want it to be as educational and informational as possible. So I'm going to open up the chat and drop any questions you have along the way into the chat or into the Q&A, or you can always email me anytime, during the webinar, tomorrow, next week, at Aaron, Aaron at bwgconnect.com, and we can just try to get your questions answered. But we would like to do get as many of those answered just today, so don't hesitate to drop anything into the chat or the Q&A. The last thing is we're starting just a few minutes here afternoon, and we're going to wrap up before 1 o'clock for sure. We're going to give you plenty of time to get onto your next meeting without being late. And with that, I think that's all the housekeeping items. Zac, I'll kind of kick it over to you. The topic, how to build a scalable brand protection strategy. I don't think anybody's shocked. It's it's something that I think for ever since we've kicked this off, we've been covering. And as things pivot, unauthorized resellers pivot, like whatever it might be, we keep having to update on what's going on. And so thanks for jumping on today. But I'll kick it over to you. Like,
Yeah.
intro on yourself and Sigil would be awesome.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the intro. And just, yeah, I will just briefly reiterate, and I think everyone on the call knows this, but BWG, amazing network. Aaron knows everybody. So whenever you have a problem and you're looking for some sort of guidance, right, he's a great kind of first person to go to get that connected. So I would echo that. Yeah. All right. Cool. Let's jump into building a scalable brand protection strategy. Quick intro on me, and when we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty on here. And I'm not going to talk a lot about my company, Sigil, here, because to Aaron's point, this is about being educational and trying to answer questions, et cetera. So I'm going to kind of gloss over that. But just quick background is I'm an attorney by training. I was at a large global firm in Washington, D.C., and then I was an in-house general counsel for a brand, right? So I have gone through and lived all of these issues. I've had to build brand protection departments and strategies from scratch. I've worked with experts in kind of every realm and domain and have just done numerous things in this area. So kind of globally and domestically, lots of different things. So I'm going to be drawing on my experience from having done that. And then also after I left that company, had my own legal practice advising brands in this area and on these topics. So lots of different angles to kind of think through and consider. So I will try to make this as kind of generically useful for brands as I can, but please, like, if you got specific questions, throw them in the chat, et cetera. I might not be able to cover, I'll try to move through all of this. My intention here is to give a good setup and then set you guys up for success and then give some specific tactics at the end, but we'll do our best to move through it. So jumping in, first, I just want to, highlight and kind of frame this issue in terms of the costs of brand abuse. This will relate to what I recommend for how you approach creating a scalable brand protection strategy, and just acknowledging the different types of problems that we have here and the scale and the scope. And every brand is going to be hit differently, right? So some of the major areas in this area that we think about are like counterfeit products, right? And I put some statistics on these things, but to also, help draw this out, right? When I think about counterfeits, I think about, there was a few years ago when Yeti came under an onslaught of counterfeit tumblers. And there were, just enormous amounts of counterfeit tumblers being sold on Amazon coming into the United States. And that's something like 50 to 60% of their net revenue was from tumblers. So when those counterfeits hit and they were undercutting price by like as much as 50%, right? Devastating problem. And so when something like that happens to a brand, you've got to chain your resources and jump into that, and try to solve that, right? Especially when you think about consumer impacts and, dissatisfied customers and, blaming the brands, negative reviews, et cetera. Right? So counterfeits don't affect everybody, but when you've got, a situation like that, then you've got to address it really quickly. Question from Katie: what do you recommend as best practice proactive measures for new brands preparing go-to-market strategy prior to launching? Oh, that's exciting. That's a really good question. Proactive strategies. Okay. So I will try to get to this a little bit further down in the end, but for proactive strategies, we're going to think about what's your organization structure to respond to this? And then we're going to think about where you're producing the products and how you're shipping and distributing them. You're going to want to handle this on the interior first, and then be ready. And then you want to be ready with like a very low cost sort of monitoring, just to keep your eye on it. But I'll try to get into those specific tactics as we get a little further. Great question.
Awesome.
So I'll move through this a little bit here. Right, unauthorized sellers and diversion, right? I highlight those together because it's not just about what's being sold or what's showing up on Amazon here, right? It's about where in your distribution network those leaks are coming from. And different brands, depending on your structure, your organization structure, are going to run into different problems. So like we work with a brand and they have a really strong retail presence. They have a really active department finding small like mom and pop stores. And that's a huge growth driver for them and an important part of their brand and who they work with. But it also generates a lot of these unauthorized resellers. And so they have to balance that strategy internally and understand, how to manage that, right? It's a bit delicate for them. Um,
Yeah, because
or,
a common thing really quick there, just the baseline is Amazon views that as you and your brand problem, right? They do not view it as an Amazon problem where we're going to shut off these unauthorized resellers because you ask us to do it. They basically say, no, the first sale doctrine says they can sell here, so we're going to let them unless you put things in place, right?
Exactly, exactly. You can thank the Second Circuit for that opinion, or kind of setting the groundwork for that in 2010 with the eBay decision. But yes, that's exactly right. Right, the marketplaces try to operate as a neutral ground, and they put this on the brands to manage. And so yeah, so that being mindful and managing that well, right? Every brand has, you might be a brand that uses subscribe and save, right? That's a great mechanism for supporting your customers, but can create a lot of traps around unauthorized sellers and being mindful of that. So lots of different things to think through. And then also I want to briefly hit on brand impersonation and phishing attacks, right? Brand protection is more than just the product sales and where that's saying. Brand protection is also about how consumers understand and experience your brand, and dealing with scams and impersonation and phishing attacks, is a real thing. Adidas had a big kind of brand impersonation issue. One of their vendors got hacked and they were able to get access to Adidas customer information, but not financial information through that hack. So then they started a massive phishing campaign, impersonating Adidas, SMS, emails, WhatsApp messages, getting people to confirm or register their accounts, and eventually capturing their financial information that way. Right? Extremely costly, because then Adidas had to step in and try to, start addressing and resolving. They had something like 40% spike in their customer service tickets and complaints, right? Like, anyway, so enormous impacts. And that's one of those things that's so challenging is Adidas was doing everything right, but it was a vendor who got hacked, and then, that ended impacting their brand. So lots of different issues that come up. And I highlight that because you can't, like, this, the biggest mistake is trying to go after everything at once, trying to solve all of it, right? And there are plenty of vendors out there, like, obviously Sigil is one of them, who are trying to say like, hey, you need to solve all these different problems. But the reality is you need to focus as a brand and hit what's most important to you, right? Like if you're getting ready to roll out a new product, right, you don't want to over invest early on, and you need to focus on, good sales and distribution, but there are some good best practices on the front end to manage that. So let's get into, how brands, what I recommend for brands to think through this problem, this strategy. And first, I want to just set a ground, or like clarify what I recommend people to think through in terms of brand protection, and also like scaling. Like, what do these terms mean? And it's really cool that Julian's on this call today, because I use this quote from him all the time, right? So a key thing to keep in mind, right, is the whole point of brand protection. This is all about driving your company forward and increasing sales. If it's not doing that, then that's not helping you, right? Brand protection is about improving your sales health so that you're getting the proper amount of revenue recovery out of your sales activity. So Julian had, a longtime brand protection expert, knows this space as well as anybody. And he and I have talked quite a bit about this, but he has this great phrase, right? There is such a thing as a bad sale. And I highlight this because for all brands out there, and especially for your leadership, it's important that they understand this, right? In the early days for a brand or a product line, you're focusing on growth, you need revenue. Great, you have to do that. And you're going to get some bad sales, and that's okay, because you've got to get market penetration, growth, you've got to get your Amazon algorithm working, et cetera. But you'll hit a point where that math switches, and you've got to be mindful of those sales. So like, to give a random example, right? You might make a large sale to, say, an international distributor. You're excited, you're entering into a new market, right? Say, I don't know, South Korea or right, Italy, wherever. You enter into a new market with a big sale to a distributor, $250,000 order or what have you. And that might be great. But let's say then a significant portion of that product ends up backdoored and then sold on your Amazon channel in the United States. And so now you lose $100,000 of sales from that inventory back in. But then that undercut your price. And so you got erosion throughout your US market, and you lose another 100,000 just from a 10% price drop, right? Across all of your different channels. And then you've been running ads during that time to try, to influencers. And now you've wasted $50,000 worth of ad spend because you didn't get any recovery from those sales. And because you're not moving inventory, your algorithm ranking drops, your organic listings are down. Now you've got to spend the next like 6 to 9 months pumping in an extra 50 grand every month just to get your listings back up to normal, right? Suddenly you're underwater by several $100,000 because of that exciting sale that was made to other territory. And that is a hard concept to get for executives to appreciate because it impacts so many different parts of the company. So for you folks as like brand protection leaders, you have to sort of advocate around that issue. And also it is like, just so you know, and Julian can attest to this, not every executive is comfortable hearing and learning that lesson. So be prepared for some friction. And that is part of what you're doing to improve the health of your company.
I think it is a story you tell, but I think it's all the data we just need, we're at the point now, I think there's enough of these brand stories out there. There's enough data to show the impact, as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago, right? Because I think you're right. A sale is a sale is a sale. Let's go. Let's blow it up. Let's get it out there. There's a question that comes in because I want to keep going on that point. It says, as a brand representative, one of the biggest challenges I face is brand impersonation or listing hackers, which significantly harms our reputation. What effective strategies can I implement to protect my brand from impersonators and safeguard its image?
Yeah, really good question coming out. So one thing that I guess to acknowledge, just being an attorney, I have specific definitions for these things, right? So brand impersonation or listing hacking, right? I would define as basically two different types of things. But what you're looking for, if I understand this to be, you've got a marketplace listing, someone's putting up a marketplace listing that looks like your brand, but isn't. Either they're not using the appropriate image or copy, or they're not, it's a counterfeit product, or it's an unauthorized reseller product, or it's old or defective, et cetera, right? Some sort of marketplace listing like that. The most effective thing that you can do there is one, you like monitoring in a way that's going to fit your budget and style, right? So there are great monitoring tools out there for lots of different areas and problems. So, but if it's a simple marketplace issue, right, you can find narrowly targeted low-cost scanning. And then depending on what of those things that I just described it is, right, you're going to want to implement some sort of complaint. Now, a brief, to briefly address this, brand registry or, Walmart's brand portal, et cetera, right? Those have a certain set of tools. If you look online, everything online says like, go use brand registry. This is a tool, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I helped advise Amazon on developing their policies in brand registry. It is a limited set of tools for a certain set of things. So just if you're doing a traditional, like if it's a copyright violation, it's a great place, right? If that's your brand impersonation that you're worried about, copyright violation or something, you can file that through brand registry. If it's something, like I said, where it's more like unauthorized reseller, you're going to need a different tool. And again, this is not meant to be a sales time, but our company still specializes in removing unauthorized sellers specifically. It's a tool that's in addition to brand registry, and we have the highest removal rates. So happy to answer those questions kind of after the call. But that's what I would say is, being mindful of the cost and trying to find the right way to respond to it. I'll move forward here. Describing scaling is pretty clear. My point to this is you've got the same amount of resources, you want to be able to do more with it, or if you get a little bit more resource, you want to have an outsized impact as you're scaling your brand protection program. So let me go ahead and move that forward. There we go. All right. So here's the first main lesson to think about when you're talking about scaling your brand protection program, is like the success in this area is really going to be driven by how your organization approaches it and how how your organizational structure is defined for brand protection. And by that, right, what I mean is you want your team and your company and your culture working like together, all moving in the same direction to solve this, and not having this silo or people fighting or struggling. So, given several examples of how protecting your brand has impacts throughout different departments, right? Customer support complaints go up, right? Marketing costs are wasted, supply chain diversion happens, right? It's all over the place. So your company, your organization as a whole needs to understand this. I'm going to go through a few things to kind of to help you think through it for how each organization should consider these things. And what you want to do as you're making decisions along this point, right, is use the idea of scaling your brand protection as the driver for which of these options that you choose, right? So I'll go through each of these. Let me start with whether you're having dedicated team members or fractional team members. So there are very few actual dedicated brand protection employees at brands. It's a pretty rare privilege for a brand to be able to find someone with that level, with that kind of skill set and then invest in it. There are huge benefits to it, right? You have someone who has domain expertise, they can keep consistency, they can keep accountability, right? And so there's a lot of benefits to that. They learn over time, build relationships with different departments, et cetera. But it doesn't happen very often. Most brands end up using, employees put part of their time towards this, and that's fine. But you're going to want to have somebody who can really champion that and make sure that they're coordinating through those different positions, right? So the other benefit is sometimes brands aren't ready to invest in that dedicated employee for that position, and so they have to kind of spread out the resources and spread it out through different departments.
What is that ratio? I can imagine if you're a smaller company, it's more the fractional, right? It starts off as, founder, owner, then it starts to grow. Then it's a fractional, it's a team member. Is it usually like somebody that's on the e-com team? And I can see when you get to a larger organization, a lot of them already have some kind of brand protection, like the team that's already there, that's used to handling brick and mortar, or more, maybe it's even company reputation.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, Aaron. So I'm going to take a couple angles to it. One is, the way that typically evolves is that the pain of brand protection usually spikes somewhere, right? I kind of describe it usually as it's like it's like an arthritis throughout your whole body. And at some point you get something spikes and you're like it's my elbow that's really hurting. And so now whoever's in charge of the elbow goes to it. So it might be that the biggest pain point is right, like a phishing attack, right? Or, the brand of the like counterfeit or something, right? So whoever's then most directly impacted usually is like, hey, my department's getting hit by this. We need to solve this. I want to get involved. And that's usually that's where it starts. And they become sort of the default person driving it. They eventually learn oh, I'm going to need help in all these different departments. And you start trying to pull people together into it. So it sort of grows organically throughout a department because these are problems that arise through the growth of a company, right? Every successful company growing hits this. And so it just happens organically. But, and this is kind of a good segue into the idea of either centralized, decentralized, or like hybrid teams, right? The way to do it though is to be intentional about that structure rather than just wait for people to raise their hands and be reactionary. So usually there's some combination. So the benefit of a centralized department or team working on this is that you get consistency. And you need consistency for several different areas for dealing with this, pricing or international issues, right? So a lot of times there's a centralized department, but the downside is you will miss the nuance. And there's a like crucial nuance in different territories, right? Like when we had issues with Chinese import and custom, right, we worked with a specific like Chinese investigator, and we had our Chinese distributor working with them so that we could understand, you know, the cultural expectations around that, right? And that's important for actually executing on, on whatever strategy you're trying to do. So what I see most brands end up doing is a hybrid approach where they have a centralized, space person who kind of deals with this, and then they have team members in the different regions or departments to help manage for that piece. I think to give a specific example, I think Newell does Newell company, and they own several amazing brands, right? Like Sharpie and Crock-Pot, right? Excuse me, Instapot. They have a really interesting like hire or structure for this where they've brought in like a centralized team who does kind of digital everything, but also brand protection piece to it because they have their fingers in everything for all their different brands and departments. So I think that was really smart and forward thinking. Kudos to Nikolai on that team, right? He has a lot of experience in this area, but I think every brand, needs to be thoughtful about how they're structuring that team.
Would you jump in, like, you jump on the phone with people and just kind of like do even a team analysis as well,
Yeah,
like to
for
help them
sure.
figure that out, just to because what's really interesting about this space is, yeah, it started to take off, years ago, but it wasn't as big of a problem as it's been in the last 3 to 4 years.
Oh yeah.
And with this, all of a sudden, 3 to 4 years, there's nothing that's really been built out. What there is there's people that have become experts internally at their company, but to know, what's the best way to run it all right now is still a case by case by case basis. And there's, I don't, I don't think there's enough data. It's not like we're 15 to 20 years in and people have refined and tested and learned.
Right.
But you deal with enough people, you could jump in and like, hey, these guys do it awesome. They're about the same size as you. Here's how the structure it works. So these guys are, Fortune 500. It's going to be different than, like Katie's question, which is around, hey, what do I do when I just start up? Um, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, to your point on that, Aaron, many other industries have been developing for a long time, and they've kind of like there are best practices that are known and established. This industry it has changes so much. There's not a lot of established best practice around an org structure for how to deal with it. And a lot of this issue, brands don't like to admit that they have problems with brand protection, right? It's sort of like the old joke is that it's like trying to sell hemorrhoid cream. No one wants to admit that they have hemorrhoids. So there's not a lot of like openness about this topic. So yeah, I'm happy to share or meet with anybody and kind of talk through their needs or bounce ideas off of them, with how to set this stuff up, for efficiency.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool.
Um, so yeah, so getting into a bit on kind of cross-functional teams, right? And this obviously, so I think this is obvious, right? But when you're going to solve these brand protection problems, the type of problem your organization have is going to change over time. So you need resources to adjust for that. Two, your response strategies are going to be multi-department. And so like this is an issue that it's easy to shunt off to like one department when they're having the problem, but really it needs to be everybody coordinating. So like those examples I gave earlier with like Yeti or Adidas, right? The responses to those were multifaceted, right? Some of them involved getting legal involved, right? And that was, a large concerted effort and investigating all these counterfeiters and bringing them together into a Schedule A suit and, filing all that stuff. But then like pairing that with media and press release, right? And showing consumers that were responding to this. Same with Adidas, right? They did a big education campaign and sharing with people, hey, we are going to like we're facing this, we know about this. Here's what you need to do to keep safe. And then of course there's a lot of training into their customer support team, to help address it or deal with it. Right. If you're having issues on unauthorized resellers, Like you need to address that issue, but you also need to go upstream. You need to understand where you're having diversion. And that's going to be a lot of relationship, depending on how your team is set up. You might have a supply chain manager or a channel manager. You might have this might all run under certain like sub teams of your sales department where you've got to go through and talk to them. Or, we might want to go. I mean, I recommend every brand should be doing regular visits to their factory overseas, like
Hmm.
regularly. You should at least annual, but if possible, multiple times per year. We can get into all kinds of strategies and et cetera around that. But it is cross-functional. And so being prepared to have those different teams involved is really important. And then the other thing is you're going to work with a lot of other departments and agencies for this, right? You are going to want to like develop relationships with customs and law enforcement for, search and seizures, et cetera. And there's, best practices and tips around that, right? You're going to want to join industry coalitions like INTA, right? You're going to want to be able to work with the online platforms, right? That's why registering for brand registry is a really good idea. The tools are more limited than people think, but it's a great thing to do. Right? There's vendors, right, like myself or consultants who can help guide on these kinds of things. If you have, I mean, if you're selling outside the United States, those other territories have like legal needs, and you might end up with a network of different attorneys to work with that are all specialized, right? And so those are things to keep in mind for your kind of cross functionality. And then a major point here to be successful in this, and this kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier, and the great phrase from Julian, your executives need to understand that there are good sales and bad sales. They need to be on board with this. So there's an interesting study out of Michigan State University, and Michigan State is they're probably one of the leading universities that looks into issues with counterfeits and e-commerce issues, brand protection. So a lot of great material coming out of Michigan State. And one of the studies that they found was that for brands who had their executive leadership had a quote thorough understanding of what they were doing with brand protection, those were the most successful programs, right? For the brands that said that there was a somewhat understanding from their executive leadership, then those were the worst performing, right? So not even like little to no understanding, even if they just have somewhat of an understanding, right? Probably because executives are never going to admit that they have anything less than somewhat of an understanding. But somewhat understanding is not enough, right? You want them like thoroughly engaged and knowing what this is doing so that you can get those investments, and dedication to make this successful. And then that's also going to push you to KPIs, right? They're going to need it simplified into a KPI to report on. And that's what I would recommend, right? Every brand's going to be different depending on the issues, right? You might be using average retail unit price or what have you. Make sure you've got a quantitative, but also a qualitative metric in that as well, right? So it's not just the number of counterfeit products seized, but it's also measuring your consumer sentiment and seeing that there's trust or consumer confidence in your brand as a result of that, right? So that you want to try to see both pieces. That's for brands that can afford to do those studies, but many brands, if they are dealing with scale issues, right, should have marketing departments that are doing surveys like that. And again, you need to be sharing that information.
Yeah, and Julian has a couple cool comments here. One is brand integrity versus revenue. I mean, that's a hard conversation to have, right? And
Oh man.
larger the corporation gets, I think the harder it is. Like if you're smaller and the brand, the founder is still there, they totally get it in the protection of the brand because it's their baby, right?
Yep.
Um, it's very, very interesting. The complexity, I think, is the thing um, that's getting me right now is this is so drastically different than even 4 years ago when we were just talking about unauthorized resellers, first sale doctrine, map violators and map policies to this point where it's a holistic, multi-departmental view of how to handle this situation as a whole. And I'm going back to Katie's at the beginning, which was if you're just starting off on this journey, these are the things you have to think about and have a plan for. And the next side of it is I'm on the brand side. Honestly, I'm wishing I could send this webinar to my leadership team like to the CEO, to the COO, to the CFO, so they could understand the overall implications. Because a lot of times you're saying, hey, we've got an issue, and this goes back to the data pieces. How do you collect the data to show that there is an issue,
Yeah,
right? And it's
yeah,
got to be a quick one pager. By the way, this is the impact that we're seeing. And when we can get there, you can catch an eye, because it can't be an 8 slide presentation. It's got to be on a slide, right? The executive team.
yes, right. Boom, right, yeah. Yeah, good call, Aaron. And I'll say too, so Grom, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and I apologize if I'm not, you've got a great question here relatedly, right? How do you know, how do we make sure that this is consistent and long term, and are there KPIs, and keeping that KPI narrow, right? Like without understanding the specifics of the brand for that, it's a great question. And I would say one of the easiest KPIs that a brand should consistently have their eye on is things like average revenue per unit, right? Like, so that, because that's going to be impacted if you're getting hit with counterfeits, right? And that price erosion happens, you're going to be that, ARPU is going to go down. Or same with unauthorized sellers, right? You'll catch a lot of that. So like that's a useful metric. But it doesn't catch everything, right? Like you're not going to see the wasted ad spend, or you're not going to see kind of the customer success metrics on it. But it is like that's one that hits home, close to home, especially for executives with kind of bottom line, and it drives decision making a lot of times for should we continue to invest in this product and this product line, or change directions on it. So like I don't know that you can put that on a specific employee, but that's a useful metric if you're looking for one to get into. And I also want to note too, Julian's got a great point here where he says, remember that any IP that you put up on Walmart or Amazon is now free for anyone else to use for that item setup. And that's true under their Amazon and Walmart terms of service. When you put up images, right, and you put up copy into a listing page, you're giving a worldwide free, royalty-free license for them and anyone else to use all that product, image, and material. So you've got to be mindful of what's going up there, right? And that you're not going to be able to submit a copyright complaint because people are using those images, right? Anyway, so yeah, that's a good call out. Jackie, you've got a point here.
And needing this level of brand protection to me seems like a good problem to have, especially in the beginning of the brand. Totally agree. Like
Yeah,
that's an indication that somebody's picked up, right, your product as a leading seller, a top seller in a category, and that's what they want to jump on top of and ride all the marketing, everything you've done around brand building. That's when these unauthorized resellers or the counterfeit comes in.
yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure. I'm going to move forward on some of these slides and just being mindful of time. I'm going to jump through a lot of this super fast. So I propose to brands, or this is what I usually consult or advise them on, is to think about this in kind of a four-step framework. And this can be really shortened. The idea is you're going to make small incremental gains here, prove your value and effectiveness, and reinvest those gains into doing more, right? So start with like a risk audit or analysis to pick what's your biggest, like most costly challenge right now, right? Like Jack is pointing out, it's a protection of a particular product, something, right? Maybe not full brand, but a certain product line. Like, okay, find that specific thing, right? And then you're going to go for a low cost win to drive up some good revenue. Hopefully you've got, you go to your executives, you've got their buy-in, you've kind of defined what you want to achieve with that, and set up for them ahead of time, saying like, hey, look, my department's gonna do this, use our budget for it, or what have you, or you're gonna ask them for budget for it or approval, right? But then say, when this comes through next year, I need my budget increased by not just enough, but enough to cover what we're going to do next. Or, we're going to do a low cost version, but we're going to do the full thing next. So, like, set for them ahead of time. Like, this is what we're going to do, but we get this, increase in budget later so that you can prove that success and you can grow it, right? There were, I was going to give some different like examples here of what you might see. I will just, what's the short way to do this? Um, each of these like 5 problems that I've listed are like different and not what you think they are, or like you need to attack them in a specific way, right? Most of the time, counterfeit issues you want to focus on international solutions and attacking there versus unauthorized sellers or map violations are usually going to be domestic. And copycats and knockoffs is a whole different world. Like we should talk about if you're in that situation. So after you identify your important problem, right, then this is when you're going to go get that buy-in, just like I said, right? Find that thing that you're going to focus on and pick your KPI and go for that low cost win, right? So there's a lot of ways to approach that, right? And things have changed. Like Aaron is a great resource, or I'm happy to be a great resource if you're looking for what's going to be that kind of low cost, like solution into that space to get your first wins. Right now, many of you might already have great programs and budgets set up, and you're able to do more than one thing at a time. And if so, like excellent, kudos, right? You're in a good spot. I would still recommend that you're approaching this from a efficiency perspective so that you can get those gains. But that's going to be different for each brand. And then the 80-20 rule, I'll just say on the end, right, as you're kind of reinvesting the gains from your program. 80-20 rule here is about after the first time you've put in 20% of your cost, you're going to get 80% of your benefit the first time you do it in a certain, like if you've got a counterfeit problem, right, you're going to invest in an anti-counterfeit program and that's going to hit 80% of your problem. Well, if you want to keep fighting counterfeits, you can, but those dollars are only going to go so much further, right? You're only going to get from 80% of the problem to 85%, right? Or diminishing returns. It might make sense to jump to a different problem set, right? Bring in a new team member, start building up that kind of cross-functional team and that mastery, and look to invest in your anti-diversion through your supply chain, right? Start putting in some training protocols. We can talk about tracking mechanisms, et cetera, but trying to cover a little bit into each of the different departments, you can see a lot of big gains fast, and that can help you kind of earn that budget with your executives. And you also learn a lot from doing that and getting, buy-in, and you'll see the interactions from those departments. All right, I'm
So
jumping.
where do map policies and unauthorized reseller policies come in?
Oh man, yeah, great question. So that's sort of foundational. If those are like, so let's say you are jumping back into like, if your area of issue is unauthorized sellers and map violations, but then when you put together your kind of low cost plan to go after them, then you're going to want to evaluate your plans and your policies there. So, look, I used to advise brands. I had brands up on map programs all the time, but like 10 years ago, this was best practice. This is what everybody did. You get your map program going, et cetera. And there's good data out of Harvard Business Review on the impact of it. Now, like to your point, Aaron, like the times have changed. And I've seen this, throughout my career. It's different issues that sort of spike. But right now, if you're having a map violation problem, you're probably having an unauthorized seller problem. Because most of your retailers, like they don't want to undercut price, right? They're trying to get the revenue. But
Hmm.
with automated repricing technology, someone undercuts on Walmart.com, they suddenly are forced to come down to match, right? Some retailers will negotiate like margin protection. So if they have to price match online, then at the end, when your contract re-ups, they might be coming at you, or it might be in the end of quarter. They're saying, hey, well, we had to price match $75,000 here. So you owe us another $75,000 or what have you, right? So those are the issues to like look out for. And so when you are getting ready to attack one of those problems, yeah, a first step is let's see what our documents are. And that, hopefully you guys have legal counsel. If you don't have legal counsel, we're happy to recommend some. Again, I'm an attorney, but I don't like that's not what I do here at Sigil, but I can get you connected to attorneys who are skilled in this. Or there are also several consultants who, though not attorneys, right, can give good guidance on it. And so lots of solutions there if that's your piece, to it. Great question.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, so I wanted to try to, we don't have a ton of time, right? We've got like 6 minutes here or so if we were gonna make sure people can get
We
out
can
or
push it to
spare some
10
time.
minutes as long as we're
But
done before 1 Eastern. Yeah, I
cool.
think we're good. Yeah.
So yeah, I wanted to give a few tactical tips, right? Depending on the problem area that people are facing. So things to consider and some of the best practices, right? So when it comes to anti-counterfeiting, right? Let's say you've got a counterfeiting problem, right? This is where you want to take, this is kind of, you're laying the groundwork for a long-term, like multi-level strategy to deal with counterfeits, because they'll come back, right? This is kind of to Crum's earlier point, right? Where it's not just going to be a one-off. You're going to solve the main issue, but you need to lay the groundwork for this. So the key with anti-counterfeiting is to do a multi-layered approach, right? Where you are setting up different ways to detect counterfeits so that the counterfeiters don't know if they've solved it or not, right? So like top level is an overt, like, so this is like a security label, right? Or something like very clearly, a sticker that's like, all right, this is authentic or something. And that's easy for people to copy, but it's like, it's also easy for consumers to be happy about it. You do something really overt like that, that way counterfeiters are like, okay, great, we've caught, like, this is how they're trying to stop us, no problem, and they'll copy it. They don't look deeper, right? And so then you want a covert type of anti-counterfeiting kind of trigger in there. And so sometimes that's, I mean, you can pair that with serialization, though that can get expensive, but you can have, like black light indicators, or you can do, salt and pepper tests, or you can do, different like things like one layer down that, help give that example of, so that someone thinks they've already, a counterfeiter thinks that they've successfully copied you, but they haven't, right? And that's how you catch them. So you want to like throw them off. There are like, you can go even deeper, especially into the pharmaceutical realm, where you've got forensic issues or taggants, which are really interesting. And that's where you've got a material that's incorporated into either the product or the packaging that will have some sort of isotope or some sort of kind of chemical signature that you can read. And there's actually there are some really interesting startups that are authenticating product using smell. They've got robot smellers where they're basically sensing kind of the chemical fingerprint. Yeah, it's really, anyway. So if you need to go deep, right, we can go deep into that piece. So that's kind of main, like what I'd recommend for that piece too. And then the other piece with, obviously consumer education is an important element always, just to like set expectations. It's usually something that I hear executives say a lot of, like, oh, people just need to know, we need to get the word out, and then that'll solve it. Like, it doesn't solve it. Consumers are looking for best price, right? It just is. Now you want to put that out because it's the right thing to do and you'll help some of the problem, but like don't expect that to be the solution. Or at least, hopefully I'm wrong one day, but I've never seen that work for 10 years. Supply chain integrity. This is where you're trying to avoid people like injecting the counterfeits into your supply chain somehow. And so this is where you've got to be really good about who you're working with, right? Vetting and auditing your suppliers and your carriers, and just making sure that they've got good relationships, good history, et cetera. It's always good to renegotiate and always good to find a new vendor in the brand protection realm. Now, this is where brand protection experts like me tend to cause problems for other business units, right? Because other business units are like, hey, we've got a great relationship with this distributor. You don't want to rock the boat. And I'm like, you should definitely rock the boat because I don't know if I trust them. But so that can cause conflict. A lot of that comes from actually, you know,
You should
um,
definitely rock the boat.
definitely rock the boat. And that's, so the reason why I say that, so my mentor trained me in all of this. He's 35 years of expertise with Fortune 500, brands doing their brand enforcement work. And he's still an advisor, right? He has some quotes and phrases. So Julian is not the only wise person to share useful quotes, right? But some of his quotes are, you can't trust your own mother. And that's, in this space, you would be amazed at how many times you get, um, shocked and betrayed by people you've been working with. So, this is kind of a deep dive into the question of diversion, unauthorized sellers, map violations, kind of handling your marketplaces, right? And some quick tips or like high level things here. We've touched on a bit of these, but you want automation. There's so much happening. You want automation here. You've got new marketplaces coming, like Walmart's having record growth right now. eBay has been doing a very good job of coming in as a professional channel selling new products. They're getting a lot of brands landed through there. They're operating as a multi-channel, you're kind of part of the omni-channel network. They've paired with Facebook Marketplace for massive exposure. Like you've got to be doing automation. If you're waiting, a lot of brands I talk to are like, oh, I don't need to monitor because I just wait for one of my retailers to tell me something or they complain about it. And it's like, I mean, I guess so. But if you're waiting till the point is so bad that customers are complaining to retailers and retailers are like then complaining to you, it's like you are way behind trying to get this solved. And like automation, like prices have come way down, right? Like a little bit in here can go a long way. So something to be mindful of. As for platform tools, we've talked about that. Just be aware of there are limits to what you can get there. So diversion, I mean, I've done a whole webinar just on two of the three of these points in terms of diversion, and happy to get into it. Lots of tips here, but this goes to Katie's question in the beginning, right? What do we do? We've got a new go-to-market product coming to market. What do we do to be proactive about it, right? It starts here. So this is what I call your safeguarding framework, that you are going to train your factory, make sure that they understand, right? You want to be on the lookout for things like third shifting, just where they're running extra units of inventory, you're making extra units of inventory at the back door. If you're serializing, right, they might be turning off the numbering, et cetera, right? And so we can talk about it, but there's ways to make sure that your factory is kind of playing ball. And like, especially there, you should be working with more than one factory. The best way to keep people like from rocking your boat or trying to steal from you is making sure that they know that they're about to lose the contract. So if you're manufacturing overseas, strongly recommend having multiple factories and letting them know that you're always reevaluating where you're producing from, et cetera. So yeah, man, I can tell you stories. The other piece to it is through your I call it training your supply chain, but really it's your distribution network, making sure that everybody who's going to be touching that product or wherever you're shipping it to like understands the importance of this, because as you're launching a new product, it is all about volume, right? You've got to get it out there. You're trying to hit the market and grow. You're going to be coordinating with marketing pushes, et cetera. And you've got to do that. So you're going to be encouraging a lot of volume, probably, offering, volume discounts, et cetera. So make sure you're only doing that to like partners that you trust. And, I would recommend things like spot audits, right? Or like you can do some really like kind of the same with counterfeiting, where you have like overt and covert mechanisms. You can do that with your supply chain, where you have your factory add like a sign and put it onto the pallet as it ships out that says like this pallet under surveillance, for diversion or something, and have that ship out, even if you don't have anything in there actually surveilling, although we can talk about techniques for it. It will make your partners, your distributors, think twice when they get that pallet and unwrap it. They're like, oh, okay, well, we better not divert, right? So things like that. And then obviously once that product lands here in the United States, you want to have things like your policies set up and in place, right? And this also goes to making sure contracts are consistent with all those distributors and your factory, et cetera, and be ready to enforce those tools, when you need them. Supply chain leaks too, like just investigating where those diversion leaks are coming from. We can talk a lot about tips and techniques and technologies that are out there to help you with that too. Just be mindful of time. Oh man, so there's a lot I can say about this. I've done a lot of litigation and enforcement in these. So make sure your documents are updated. A big thing to look out for here is like jurisdictions and where you can actually enforce and get good ramifications. So I mentioned Schedule A earlier. That's a really useful new tool, especially coming out of Illinois and a little bit in Florida, where you can bundle together all these like unknown problem actors into a lawsuit. But so that's super useful. If you're trying to pursue someone outside of the United States, like use international arbitration. So there are certain territories where you can have contracts where it's okay to have that jurisdiction and be fine to enforce. Australia is going to recognize a United States court order, but China will not. Right. So in that case, you're better off having your contracts being subject to international arbitration disputes, because China will enforce an international business arbitration for example. So like that, anyways, you're looking through those documents, having those jurisdiction protocols, look into there. Trademarks, right? If your brand is in several different territories, you need trademark rights in all those territories. And I like using what I call sword and shield trademarks. And so, because trademark filing fees tend to be quite low compared to other IP that you can file, just get doubling up where you've got a trademark that's just your brand, that's really to protect yourself, but then kind of a broader sort of standard character version, eliminate the colors, get just your catchphrases or whatever, like a sword mark that you can use to enforce and like really proactively stop people. Anyway, so there's strategies around that. And again, in the different enforcement venues. So I guess, I want to be mindful that it's 5 minutes here from the hour, and pause.
I think what's crazy is I think we do this, 4 years ago and we wrap up with nothing else to go, 20 minutes early.
Yeah.
And it's so significantly changed, gotten so much more complicated. And it's such a huge proven impact now, right? That like we could talk about this stuff for 4 or 5 hours straight. So
Man, I'd love
Zac,
to.
yeah,
Yeah.
thanks
It's
for
all
being
the
yeah, well, thanks for being such a great partner. I mean, I would encourage everybody to have a follow-up conversation with Zac and the team over at Sigil. They're awesome, working with a ton of brands in the network. They come highly recommended. I mean, I would love to have a conversation with you as well. Look for a follow-up email from me. I don't sell anything. I just like to network, knowledge share, and figure out the topics. More than happy to open my network up to anybody as well. But Zac, key takeaways here as we wrap up.
Yeah, it's focus on that organization structure, right? This is how you're going to be successful in your brand protection, right? Having the right team members and executive buy-in, right? Remembering for your own perspective, this is not brand protection for brand protection's sake. This is about the sales health and the health of your organization. You're trying to drive growth, right? And then, right, just pick one thing and get started, right? Pick one thing and leverage that to the next thing, leverage that to the next thing.
Awesome. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thanks everybody for the great interaction, the great comments, the great questions that came in. It makes these webinars so much more fun. But with that, we're going to wrap up this webinar today. Everybody take care, stay safe. Look forward to having you at a future event. Thanks again, Zac. You're awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you. Alrighty, bye.